Let's start with something simple but powerful. You are the author of your own story. And in that story, responsibility is the pen. Most people spend years blaming others for their lack of progress, their broken relationships, their missed opportunities. But what if I told you that the moment you start taking full responsibility for your life, everything begins to shift? Responsibility isn't just about admitting when you're wrong. It's about owning your actions, your choices, and even your mindset. It's about recognizing that while you can't control everything that happens to you, you can always control how you respond to it. And in that response lies your power. Think about this. How many times have you said, I'm stuck, or I have no choice? When we speak like that, we surrender our power to circumstances. But when we say, this is where I am, and this is what I'm going to do about it, we take the wheel. Life doesn't happen to us, it happens because of us. Let's take a look at personal growth. Growth begins when we stop pointing fingers and start asking better questions. What can I do differently? How did I contribute to this outcome? Those questions are uncomfortable, they challenge our ego, but they also open doors, they expose the truth, and with truth comes clarity. Responsibility is also the foundation of trust. In teams, in relationships, in leadership, people don't follow titles, they follow behavior. When you consistently take ownership of your actions, people begin to trust you. They know you won't run from mistakes. They know you'll show up, not just when things are easy, but especially when things are hard. You see, responsibility is contagious. When one person chooses to be accountable, others follow. It sets a new tone, a new standard in families, in businesses, in culture. But someone has to go first. Someone has to be brave enough to say, it starts with me. There's a myth that responsibility is heavy, that it's a burden. But that's only true when you fight it. The truth is, responsibility is freedom. Because once you accept that no one is coming to rescue you, you also realize no one can stop you. You don't need permission to change. You don't need validation to move forward. You just need the courage to own your role. So if you want to transform your life, not just tweak it, but transform it, start by looking in the mirror. Take ownership of your words, of your habits, of your standards. Every result you've created, good or bad, started with a choice. And that's the most empowering truth of all. If you created it, you can change it. Transformation doesn't come from waiting for someone else to fix things. It comes from asking yourself, what am I willing to do to grow? It comes from leading yourself first so you can lead others better. Take responsibility, not because it's easy, but because it's the beginning of everything you're capable of becoming. 5 keynotes of the speech, responsibility is the foundation of personal transformation. Taking ownership shifts power from external circumstances back to your control. Personal growth begins when you replace blame with introspection. Consistent responsibility builds trust in leadership, relationships, and teams. Responsibility is not a burden. It's the path to freedom and self-leadership. Responsibility is the foundation of personal transformation because it marks the turning point between passive existence and intentional living. At the core of every meaningful change in life, whether it's in your career, your relationships, or your mindset, lies a decision to take ownership. When we stop waiting for things to change on their own and instead choose to be accountable for our choices, our behaviors, and our outcomes, we begin to access a kind of power that transforms how we engage with the world. Most people walk through life unconsciously handing over responsibility to others or to circumstances. They say things like, I can't help it, or that's just the way things are, or if only someone would give me a chance. But the moment you take responsibility, you shift the story. Instead of playing the role of a victim, you become the active participant in your own life. And that shift is not minor, it is transformational. It means you no longer rely on luck, people, or permission to change your situation. You realize that your life, your progress, and your fulfillment are your responsibility, no one else's. Taking responsibility doesn't mean you control everything. You don't control the economy, the weather, or other people's opinions. But you always control your response. You control how you show up. You control what you focus on. You control the actions you choose to take or not take. When you start viewing responsibility through that lens, it no longer feels like a burden. It becomes the gateway to freedom. You stop reacting to life and start designing it. Responsibility brings clarity. When you accept that the life you're living is, in many ways, a product of your decisions, past and present, it forces you to look closely at your patterns. You begin to notice how often fear drives your choices. You see where you've settled for comfort over growth. And in that awareness, transformation begins. Because once you see clearly, you can't unsee, you start making different choices. You stop repeating the same cycles. You become more intentional about your actions because now you understand their long-term impact. Personal transformation doesn't happen in a straight line. It's messy. It's uncomfortable. And it often requires you to face things you've been avoiding: disappointment, regret, failure, and even guilt. But taking responsibility means facing all of it without excuses. It means acknowledging the role you've played, even in your setbacks. That kind of honesty is rare, but it's also powerful. Because the same moment you take responsibility for what went wrong, you also take responsibility for what happens next. Responsibility fuels growth because it keeps you in motion. You stop waiting for the perfect moment and you start acting with what you have. You stop blaming others and you focus on what you can change. This mindset creates momentum. It makes you more resilient because you no longer see failure as a final verdict, but as a learning opportunity. And with every lesson you internalize, you grow wiser, stronger, and more capable of handling the challenges ahead. People often look for motivation outside themselves, books, podcasts, mentors, and while those can be helpful, nothing will drive your transformation like personal responsibility. When you accept that your future is in your hands, motivation becomes internal. You don't need to be pushed because you're pulling yourself forward. You act with purpose, not because someone told you to, but because you've decided to lead your own life. Even your identity begins to change. You stop identifying as someone who can't or hasn't and start seeing yourself as someone who does, someone who takes action, someone who learns from mistakes and grows through adversity. That shift in identity is the essence of transformation. It's not just about changing what you do, but about changing who you believe you are. Responsibility also transforms how you relate to others. When you take ownership of your communication, your reactions, and your commitments, people begin to trust you. You become a person of integrity, not because you're perfect, but because you're accountable. And that builds deeper relationships, stronger teams, and healthier communities. People follow those who own their part, even when it's hard. In the end, taking responsibility doesn't guarantee immediate success, but it guarantees growth. It ensures that no matter what happens, you remain in the driver's seat of your life. And from that place, transformation becomes not just possible, but inevitable. Taking ownership shifts power from external circumstances back to your control because it redefines where authority in your life truly resides. Many people move through life reacting to situations, constantly waiting for conditions to improve, people to change, or luck to strike. This mindset gives all the power away. When we believe our lives are determined by external forces, we become passive. We wait, we complain, we feel stuck. But when we take ownership, we reclaim the power we once surrendered. We realize we're not passengers, we're drivers. And that realization alone can change everything. Ownership is about refusing to let circumstances dictate your mindset, direction, or effort. It doesn't deny the reality of challenges, hardships, or injustice. It's even in the middle of this, I still choose how I move forward. That is the moment power returns to you. It's subtle but deeply significant. You stop looking outward for solutions and start creating them from within. You stop being at the mercy of life and start designing it with clarity and intention. When you focus only on external conditions, what someone else said, what society expects, what resources you lack, you begin to feel limited. Power feels distant. It feels like something other people have or something you must earn. But power is not about control over others or having perfect circumstances. True power is the ability to choose your next step no matter the situation. It's choosing to respond with character, with discipline, with creativity. That choice can never be taken away unless you give it away yourself. By taking ownership, you also learn to separate facts from interpretations. The fact might be that you lost a job or failed an exam or experienced a setback. But the interpretation that you're not good enough, that life is unfair, that nothing ever works out is a story, and stories are where we often lose our power. Taking ownership means examining those stories, challenging them, and rewriting them. Instead of, I failed, so I'm not cut out for this, you say, I failed, and here's what I'm going to do next. That's a statement of power. One of the most transformative things about ownership is how it changes your relationship with problems. People who don't take ownership often feel overwhelmed or paralyzed when facing difficulty. But when you take responsibility, you become solution-focused. Problems stop being brick walls and start becoming puzzles. Challenges become invitations to grow. Every situation, no matter how tough, becomes something you can learn from, improve through, or navigate with resilience. This doesn't mean you enjoy every hardship, but it does mean you no longer see yourself as powerless in the face of them. Ownership also brings stability in a world full of uncertainty. When you rely too much on external factors, other people's opinions, the economy, your upbringing, you build your foundation on shifting ground. But when your power comes from within, your foundation strengthens. No matter what changes around you, your sense of control remains intact because you're anchored in responsibility. That inner stability creates confidence, not arrogance, but a quiet belief that you can handle whatever comes your way. This shift in power also affects how you lead and influence others. People who take ownership lead by example. They don't make excuses. They don't blame. They take initiative. And that behavior is magnetic. It earns respect. It inspires. It invites others to take responsibility too. Whether you're leading a team, a family, or just yourself, the ability to own your actions creates a ripple effect. It raises the standard not by force, but by influence. It's also worth noting that when you take ownership, you become less reactive. You don't waste energy trying to control things you can't. You stop obsessing over what people think because your self-worth is grounded in your choices, not their approval. You don't wait for the perfect time to act because you understand that action itself creates opportunity. This kind of mindset builds momentum. Every small act of responsibility compounds over time, creating massive internal and external change. In moments where life feels out of control, it's tempting to wait for a rescue. But the truth is, the rescue comes the moment you say, I'm in charge of what happens next. That is where your real strength lies. Not in hoping the world changes, but in deciding how you will. Taking ownership doesn't mean everything will go your way. But it means that no matter what happens, you'll always be in a position to grow, adapt, and lead yourself forward. That is the power that ownership gives, and it changes everything. Personal growth begins when you replace blame with introspection, because real development doesn't happen by pointing fingers, it happens by looking inward. When we blame others for our setbacks, frustrations, or failures, we protect our ego but sacrifice our progress. Blame creates a false sense of comfort. It allows us to feel right while staying stuck. It gives us a short-term escape from responsibility, but denies us the long-term rewards of growth. On the surface, blaming others feels easier, but it's a trap that keeps us from seeing the truth that would actually move us forward. Growth requires honesty, and honesty begins with the willingness to ask difficult questions about ourselves. Not in a self-critical or punishing way, but with the intention of learning. Why did that conversation go badly? Why do I keep hitting the same wall in my career? Why do certain habits keep showing up even when I know they're hurting me? These aren't easy questions to face, but they're the gateway to awareness. And awareness is the birthplace of change. Blame keeps the focus outside. It directs our energy toward what someone else should have done, how the system is flawed, or why circumstances weren't fair. But introspection flips that lens. It brings the focus back to what we could have done, what we missed, and how we contributed to the outcome. That shift doesn't mean we take on guilt for everything. It means we take on ownership for our role. And that ownership is what gives us leverage to grow. If you cause part of the problem, you can also be part of the solution. When you start replacing blame with introspection, you begin to see patterns. You realize that it's not just this one situation. It's a theme. Maybe it's the way you avoid conflict. Maybe it's how you hesitate to take initiative. Maybe it's a tendency to procrastinate when things get uncomfortable. These patterns were always there, but blame blocked you from seeing them. Once you shift into introspection, they become visible. And once they're visible, you can work on them. This process doesn't feel good at first. It's humbling to realize that we're the common denominator in many of our struggles, but it's also freeing because now you're not stuck waiting for others to change. You're not at the mercy of external forces. You're in motion. Every insight you gain through introspection becomes a tool you can use. You learn faster. You make adjustments. You stop repeating the same mistakes, not because you got lucky, but because you got honest. Introspection also builds emotional intelligence. As you look inward, you become more aware of your triggers, your insecurities, your blind spots. You begin to understand not just what you do, but why you do it. That self-understanding deepens your empathy for others. You stop being quick to judge because you know how complicated people can be, yourself included. This growth in emotional intelligence strengthens your communication, your leadership, and your relationships. You begin to respond instead of react because you've trained yourself to pause and reflect. The most powerful leaders, creatives, and change makers in the world aren't those who never make mistakes. They're the ones who reflect deeply on their experiences and evolve because of them. They turn every challenge into a classroom. Every failure becomes a teacher. That mindset doesn't happen automatically. It comes from practice, specifically the practice of asking, what is this situation here to teach me? Instead of who caused this or why did this happen to me? You ask, how can I grow from this? Replacing blame with introspection also eliminates excuses. It strips away the need to defend yourself constantly or prove you're right. When you're focused on learning, you don't waste energy preserving your ego. You're not afraid to say, I didn't handle that well, or I missed that opportunity. That level of humility doesn't make you weak. It makes you powerful. Because the person who can admit a mistake is the person who can correct it. The person who sees their own flaws clearly is the person who can refine their character with intention. The truth is, no real growth happens without discomfort. But the discomfort of introspection is productive. It's the discomfort of stretching beyond who you were yesterday. It's the discomfort of facing your own reflection and choosing to improve it one honest step at a time. When you remove blame from your vocabulary and replace it with honest, reflective questions, you create a life that's not reactive but responsive. You stop waiting for growth to happen to you, and you start creating it from the inside out. That's the moment everything changes, not because the world shifts, but because you do. Consistent responsibility builds trust in leadership, relationships, and teams, because trust is not formed through words or intentions, it's built through behavior over time. When people see you take responsibility consistently, especially when things go wrong, they begin to believe in your reliability. Trust is fragile. It doesn't come from being perfect, but from being accountable. People don't expect leaders or partners or teammates to never make mistakes. What they expect is that when mistakes happen, you'll own them, learn from them, and move forward with integrity. That kind of consistency creates emotional safety and mutual respect, both of which are essential in any healthy relationship or effective team. When you consistently take responsibility, people know they can count on you. They know you won't deflect blame or make excuses. They know you won't disappear when challenges arise. You become someone who faces problems head on, who admits when they've fallen short, and who shows up with solutions. That reliability is what allows others to relax and focus. In teams, it creates cohesion. In relationships, it builds emotional closeness. In leadership, it inspires loyalty. People are drawn to those who hold themselves to a high standard, not just in moments of success, but especially in moments of pressure. Responsibility is tested most in the moments when it's tempting to avoid it. When something goes wrong, when a result is disappointing, or when admitting fault could make you vulnerable, those are the critical moments that shape how others see you. Anyone can claim responsibility when things go well. But the real test is whether you can still take ownership when the outcome is uncomfortable. That's when people are watching most closely. And when they see you consistently choosing accountability, their respect for you deepens. They know you're not just performing, you're trustworthy. In leadership, trust is built not by commanding authority, but by demonstrating responsibility. A leader who takes ownership of their decisions, their words, and their results earns the trust those they lead. Even when a decision doesn't work out, if the leader stands by it, learns from it, and makes adjustments, people stay engaged. They feel safe to contribute, to take risks, and to be honest, because the leader is modeling the very behavior they want to see in others. On the other hand, leaders who shift blame or avoid responsibility damage the team's trust. People start holding back. Communication becomes guarded. Creativity dies, all because the foundation of trust has been eroded. In relationships, whether personal or professional, consistent responsibility communicates care. When you say, that was my fault, or I could have handled that better, you show the other person that their experience matters. You acknowledge their perspective. You're not protecting your ego at the cost of the relationship. That humility and honesty invite the same from others. It creates a dynamic where both people feel seen, heard, and valued. And over time, those small moments of accountability build deep, lasting trust. Responsibility also plays a key role in conflict resolution. In any team or relationship, disagreements and tension are inevitable. But how those conflicts are handled determines whether trust is strengthened or broken. When people take ownership of their part in a conflict, it de-escalates blame and opens the door to real dialogue. It shifts the focus from proving who's right to solving what went wrong. That collaborative mindset not only resolves the immediate issue, but also reinforces trust for the future. Consistency is everything. You can't build trust through one act of responsibility and then abandon it when things get tough. Trust is cumulative. It grows when people see that your behavior aligns with your values over time. It grows when people observe that your accountability isn't conditional, that it shows up in both success and failure. That kind of consistency creates predictability, and predictability is the bedrock of trust. People trust what they can count on. If they can count on you to own your actions, your impact, and your role, they'll invest more in the relationship, the team, or the mission. The impact of consistent responsibility isn't just external, it changes how you see yourself too. When you act with integrity day after day, you build self-trust. You start to believe in your ability to handle challenges, navigate tension, and lead others with confidence. You stop doubting your place in a team or relationship because you know you're contributing with honesty and effort. That internal trust gives you the courage to take more risks, make bold decisions, and stay grounded even when things are uncertain. In a world where people often hide behind excuses, deflect blame, or avoid discomfort, responsibility stands out. It signals strength, maturity, and authenticity. And when practiced consistently, it creates relationships, teams, and communities that are not only more effective, but deeply rooted in trust. Responsibility is not a burden. It's the path to freedom and self-leadership because it removes the invisible chains that keep us stuck. Most people view responsibility as something heavy, something that limits them or adds pressure. They associate it with blame, guilt, or obligation. But that perception is deeply flawed. Real responsibility doesn't weigh you down, it lifts you up. It gives you the authority to shape your own life. It hands the control back to you and says, you get to choose what happens next. That's not a burden, that's freedom. When you fully embrace responsibility, you stop waiting for someone else to change your life. You stop waiting for permission, for better circumstances, or for the perfect moment. Instead, you start where you are with what you have and you move forward. That mindset is liberating. It allows you to break free from the need for external validation. You're no longer trying to please everyone, prove yourself to the world, or hide behind excuses. You're simply taking charge. That clarity gives you energy, direction, and peace of mind. Freedom doesn't come from avoiding responsibility. It comes from owning it. When you avoid responsibility, you become dependent. You depend on others to fix things, to recognize your worth, or to tell you what to do. You give away your autonomy in exchange for comfort. But comfort without growth turns into stagnation. And stagnation over time becomes a kind of prison. You might not see the bars, but you feel them. You feel them in the form of regret, restlessness, and missed potential. Taking responsibility breaks those bars and says, I'm not a victim of my circumstances. I'm the author of my story. This kind of freedom doesn't mean life becomes easy. In fact, taking responsibility often requires more effort, more honesty, and more discipline. But it's effort with a purpose. You're not just reacting to life, you're leading it. You're setting standards for yourself. You're creating habits that align with your goals. You're choosing who you want to become and taking daily steps in that direction. That's what self-leadership really is, not controlling everything, but directing yourself with intention. When you lead yourself, you no longer need to be micromanaged or pushed. You're not motivated by fear or pressure from others. You're motivated by values, by purpose, by the vision you have for your life. That internal motivation is sustainable. It's consistent. It doesn't rise and fall with your emotions or external rewards. It comes from a deeper place, a sense of alignment between who you are and what you do. That alignment is where true freedom lies. Responsibility also brings clarity. It strips away distractions and excuses. It forces you to ask the hard questions. What do I want? What am I willing to do to achieve it? What am I avoiding? Those questions are uncomfortable, but they bring truth. And with truth comes focus. You stop wasting time on things that don't matter. You stop blaming others for where you are. You stop waiting to be rescued. You realize you've had the power all along, you just weren't using it. This clarity extends into every area of your life. In your work, you stop complaining and start creating. In your relationships, you stop keeping score and start showing up fully. In your health, your mindset, your time, you take the reins. No more drifting, no more living by default. You begin to live by design. That design might not be perfect, and the process might be messy, but it's yours. That ownership brings meaning, and meaning brings fulfillment. Most people don't realize how much energy they waste avoiding responsibility. They spend time justifying, defending, denying, blaming, explaining. All of that is exhausting. When you drop the defenses and just say, yes, this is mine to handle, you conserve that energy. You redirect it into solutions, progress, and growth. It doesn't mean you never struggle. It means you stop struggling against the truth. You work with it. You learn from it. You grow through it. Self-leadership through responsibility also creates resilience. Life will challenge you. There's no avoiding that. But when you've trained yourself to take ownership, you don't break easily. You don't collapse under pressure. You adapt. You find your footing. You figure things out. You know that no matter what happens, you will show up, you will learn, and you will keep moving forward. That belief in yourself isn't arrogance. It's earned confidence. And it's built through consistent acts of responsibility. So when people say responsibility is a burden, they're only seeing part of the picture. Yes, it requires effort. Yes, it demands honesty. But it also brings freedom, freedom from dependence, from helplessness, from waiting. It gives you the power to lead yourself first. And when you do that, you don't just change your life, you start to change the lives of those around you too. Because freedom is contagious. And it always starts with ownership. When you take responsibility for your life, you begin a transformation that reaches every corner of who you are and how you live. You stop living passively and start leading with intention. You reclaim power from circumstances, you replace blame with introspection, and you build trust through consistent accountability. What once felt like a burden becomes your greatest source of freedom. Because in ownership, you find clarity, resilience, and purpose. You stop waiting for change and become the force that creates it. Responsibility is not just a choice, it's the beginning of everything you're capable of becoming.